historically, it may look like we did something nasty to Pete, and it may have been that we could have done it better. But the thing was, as history also shows, Ringo was the member of the band. It's just that he didn't enter the film until that particular scene, you know?
It is a dodgy moment, and you don't know what to do. You know, you either stick loyally with your friend, like a lot of people probably would have liked to have seen us do, the Liverpool fans, and you get blown out. It's not an easy decision, that. So we talked amongst ourselves and talked with Brian and took a lot of advice on it all.
It was quite normal in those days to find material for artists by going to Tin Pan Alley and listening to all the publishers' wares. I mean, that was a regular part of my life. I would spend a long time looking for songs. And the songs I was looking for the Beatles was really a hit song. It didn't matter, so long as it suited the group. And Love Me Do, as I say, was the best one they were able to offer. The kind of song I was looking for, I did actually find. And that was a song by Mitch Murray called How Do You Do It? And I was convinced this was a hit song.
The traditional role for producers was to come up with the hits for the lads and say, I think this would be a good one for you to record. And he'd found this song through Dick James Publishing, as it happened. These two writers, Mitch Murray and Peter Callender, had come up with this song called How Do You Do It?
When we first got in the studio, they tried to give us other people's songs. They didn't like ours. And it forced us to do a version of How Do You Do What You Do to Me.
You know, it wasn't the most marvellous song I'd ever heard in my life, but I thought it had that essential element which would appeal to a lot of people.
And George said, I think this would be great for you. And we said, well, I'm not really sure if it's our style at all, really. He said, it'd be fantastic, it'll be a hit. And we said, well, you know, it may be, but he said, look, try it. So we went back up to Liverpool and we rehearsed it, got it down.
Cyn was John's original girlfriend at art school.
Well, with Cyn, it starts off sort of, well, you know, he's hooked.
When we had Julian and I became pregnant,
Hughes sank in. He went pale, and I saw the fear in his eyes. For a couple of minutes we were both silent. I watched him as I waited for a response. There's only one thing for it, Cyn. We'll have to get married.
It was a Wednesday and Brian called. I don't remember John calling though. It's in somebody's book. Would you join the band? And I said, what do you mean? He said, no, really join the band. And I said, sure, yeah, when? And he said, now. And I said, no, I can't do that. Because we've got these other 4 guys here. We've got a gig for months, and, I can't just pull out now and it'd all end. So I said, I'll join you Saturday. Because we used to have Saturday off, because that's when they used to change the campers. So I gave Rory Thursday, Friday, Saturday to bring someone in, because to open again on Sunday, which I thought was giving them a hell of a lot of time. And that was it.
We'd played the Cabin the night before, and Brian came up to me. We were loading stuff in a van with Neil, giving John a lift home, and Brian just turned around and said, Pete, I'd like to see you in the office in the morning. I don't know more about it, because since Brian had taken over as manager, I'd handled the business side of things before with Mona. And I just thought it was another brain-picking session. He'd asked me for promoters, prices, should we play this venue, what's this guy like, I just thought, wants a little bit more advice. So trundled in, no expectations. Went into the office about 11 o'clock in the morning, something like that. I suppose that's when I became a little apprehensive about what was going to happen, okay, because Brian wasn't his normal cool, calm, placid self, not like, oh, you Pete, come in, have a coffee, this type of stuff. He was very reticent, and he basically talked around the subject for a while and then turned around very apologetically, I suppose that's the word, turned around and said, Pete, he said, I have bad news for you. He said, the boys want you out, and it's been arranged that Ringo will join the band on Saturday. And of course that was the bombshell, because I'd had no forewarning at all about this. All this had been going on behind closed doors. And at that stage, because of, I suppose you'd turn around and say you're shell-shocked, I was trying to think, what have I done wrong, what's the reason for it. He basically turned around and said, well, they feel Ringo's a better drummer. And as I've always turned around and said that was a matter of opinion, because I was rated along with Johnny Hutch to be one of the, top drummers in Liverpool. But again, that's food for thought. And everyone has their own opinion about that, So I went away. And it was only when I got back home to Mona, and I explained the situation to Mona, the reality of the situation hit me. Because what I'd agreed to was that I would play 2 gigs before Ringo joined the band on Saturday. One at Chester Ballroom and somewhere else. Okay, details, it's, doesn't make anything at the moment. But when the reality of the situation hit me, and I got home, be honest, I cried. I broke down. I'd put 2 years of my life into this band. And basically on the cusp of just, first record release, which we hoped was going to do great for us, it was snatched from me. And Mo turned around and said, well, I'm not happy with that. I'm not happy with the, the reasons. So she tried to talk to Epstein. Epstein wouldn't answer the phone. In a sort of semi-conscious state, dumbstruck and shell-shocked, I'd agreed to it. But when I got back home, the reality was there. I just turned around and told Neil, tell Brian, I said, I can't play those gigs, But Brian must have already, I suppose, surmised that was going to happen, even though I agreed, because he had Johnny Hutch from the Big Three on the bill, and Johnny stood in on both occasions.
Then Richie stood at the kitchen sink in this tiny terraced house in Liverpool 8 and did as John had bid. He shaved off his beard, then tried to flatten down his hair.
And then I arrived Saturday. We had about 2 hours rehearsal, and we played that night, and we've been playing ever since.
The Beatles said to us, "What do you think?" I said I thought it sounded better than they'd been. It wasn't the sound they'd had with Pete, it was different. Pete had a tendency to speed up and slow down. Ringo didn't, and he had charisma. But we felt sorry for Pete all the same. They'd had a succession of drummers through the years, and finally now they found one who integrated, someone who fitted. Until this point it was always John, Paul, George and a drummer. Now it was John, Paul, George and Ringo.
We played the Cavern. There was a lot of fighting and shouting. Half of them hated me, half of them loved me.
There was a few people there who were shouting, "Ringo never, Pete best forever." And after about half an hour I said, "Oh, bugger off," or something. And stepped out of this, the Cavern had this, it was 3 tunnels. And we stepped out of what was the dressing room into this dark tunnel, and some guy just butted me right in the eye. That was a bad day. And then I walked under a bus, got hit by a double-deck bus.
George fought for me.
Richie Barrett doing Some Other Guy. The very first film ever made, Granada TV, of us doing it in the Cavern, and John's going, "Some other guy now."
Because the same reason anybody gets married, Don't want to be slushy like, but you do, don't you? When you want to get married, when you got to go, you got to go. I always say.
But Auntie Mimi made it very clear that she didn't want anything to do with it. She told him he was stupid. He made an absolute fool of himself, and she didn't want to speak to him again. So she didn't come to the wedding. My mother was in Canada. So we had a very bizarre wedding, but I wouldn't change a thing because it was hysterical. It was a very funny wedding. It was so typically John and Paul and George and Brian and me, and no mother, no family, no photographers. We haven't even got a photograph of the wedding. And the guy that married us looked as though he was doing a funeral, never mind a marriage. And behind the window where the guy was standing was this guy with a pneumatic drill who through the whole of the ceremony was doing his pneumatic drill. And it was just funny. It was so funny. I mean, the whole experience was bizarre, but it was quite beautiful at the same time.